cry, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Please stand if you are able.
Thank you. Heavenly Father, we seek blessings on the task before us. Bless our efforts with clear insight, our deliberations with wisdom, our work with clarity and accuracy, and our decisions with impartiality. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have before us three public hearings this evening. Madam Clerk, would you please read item 5A?
Fiscal year 2019 budget amendment authorizing the appropriation of fiscal year 2018 carryovers and approving additional appropriations for certain capital projects.
Thank you. I will call on our budget manager, Mrs. Jett.
Good evening and happy New Year to everyone. Tonight's public hearing is for amendments to the 2019 budget for various capital projects, grants, and for school purposes. This is the annual carry forward from fiscal 18 to fiscal 19. The city and the school requests are combined into one public hearing. The total budget amendment is for $8,118,927. This includes approximately $6.8 million for projects or grants that are ongoing. The request also includes an additional $1.4 million in additional appropriations. To summarize the request by funds, it's $472,000 in the general fund, $389,000 in the city grants funds, $3,865,000 in the public works fund, $855,000 for water system improvements, $97,000 for wastewater improvements, $879,000 for the public facilities capital fund, $25,000 for the public safety capital fund, $250,000 for the new court construction fund, $33,000 both in the water fund and in the wastewater fund, $148,000 in the parking enterprise fund, $999,000 in the school fund, and $324,000 in the school grants funds. I'd now like to discuss the supplemental appropriations. In the capital projects funds, there are supplemental appropriations for the downtown streetscape renovation project. There's a supplemental appropriation of $1.25 million. VDOT will fund 80% of that. The local share will be funded with gas tax revenues as well as fund balance in the Public Works Fund. In the Fall Hill Avenue Noble Way Signal Project, the request includes an additional appropriation of $27,495. This is based on a revised project estimate. Since VDOT funds are not available for this, the city has identified gas tax as a source of revenue of funds that were previously identified as VDOT funding. The use of gas tax will increase by $62,806 for a total gas tax usage of $231,562. The final project in the Public Works Capital Fund that requires a supplemental appropriation is the Fall Hill Avenue widening. The request is for an additional appropriation of $6,463 for playground betterments that were included in the Fall Hill widening project, including fencing. In the Public Facilities Capital Fund, there's a supplemental appropriation request of $107,370 that will come from a general fund transfer, and this is to be used for improvements to Memorial Park restrooms. In the Enterprise Fund, there's a supplemental appropriation request of $28,500 related to the parking garage payment system. The source of funds for this request will be net assets in the parking fund. So the carry forwards and appropriations will have, will decrease fund balances in various funds, as well as recognize revenue from various funding sources. The funding sources include gas tax receipts of $431,562. This includes an additional allocation of $87,495 of gas tax revenues. The revenue sources include $2.2 million of state revenue, $191,000 of proceeds from indebtedness. This is unencumbered funds related to the enterprise resource planning software system. General fund balance that was previously set aside for use of capital of $457,370. Fund balance in the school fund of $990,000. Fund balance in the city grants fund of $388,651. That was the city grants fund. Fund balance in the school grants fund of $324,000. Fund balances in the various capital funds of $1,672,000. And in the enterprise fund, net assets of $1,166,000. If there are any questions, please let me know.
Are there any questions for Ms. Jett? This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here who would like to speak to this matter? If not, then we will declare the public hearing closed. This is a resolution up for first read.
Madam Mayor, move first read, fiscal year FY 2019 budget amendments authorizing the appropriation of FY 2018 carryovers and approving additional appropriations for certain capital projects.
We do need disclosures since this discusses school issues.
Oh, indeed, we do. Thank you, Ms. Jett. I'll ask for the disclosures. Dr. Duffy.
Can I make the disclosure for 10B also at the same time? Okay. Yes, I would like to make a disclosure regarding item 5A for the fiscal year 2019 budget amendment we just discussed, and for the item in the city manager's agenda, 10B, approving a fiscal year 2019 budget amendment appropriating funds in school grants funds. I'll state that I am an assistant principal for James Monroe High School in the city, Fredericksburg City Public Schools, and I am able to participate in these transactions fairly, objectively, and in the public interest.
Thank you. Mr. Fry.
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. And to the same items as Dr. Duffy just went over, item 5A and item 10B. Read my disclosure now. My spouse is a member of my spouse is an employee of the Fredericksburg Public School System. I am able to participate in this transaction fairly, objectively, and in the public interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, we have a motion. And
Second.
was seconded?
There we go.
The motion and seconded. Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. And Officer Worley, thank you for being with us this evening. Madam Clerk, would you please read item 5B?
Amending the Unified Development Ordinance to provide for form-based zoning and to add form-based regulations to the Commercial Highway Zoning District and adopting a frontage map for the district.
I'll call on Senior Planner, Mr. Craig.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If I could have the computer, please. Excuse me, voice. The item before you all this evening is the creation of a form-based code for the Commercial Highway Zoning District. This proposed zoning ordinance would apply in areas with an adopted small area plan and a T-5C Transect, and we'll get into a little bit about what that means in a second. There are generally 5 parts to the presentation. It's helpful to give an overview of where we are, how we got here, and what this means in terms of the big picture, so we'll start there. We'll cover the Transect, T5C, and then we'll hit the 3 parts of the form-based code that are proposed: urban fabric standards, frontage standards, lot and building type standards, after which I'll give the staff recommendation, which is approval of the text amendment. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on this item on November 14th. They held a subsequent meeting on this ordinance on the 28th of November, after which they recommended approval of this ordinance by a vote of 6-1. So what you see before you on the screen is a picture of the city. And this area in green will be important to our discussion tonight. It is the Area 3 Small Area Plan boundary. But what we wanted to start by showing in our planning efforts, there are things that are becoming clear. And for members of the public that aren't as familiar with this, we've broken the city down into 10 small planning areas. And piece by piece, we're doing fine-grained retail planning for each individual area. The first area was Area 3. The small area plan was adopted last year, and this is one of the implementation steps of that plan. And we'll talk about some of the others too. But what you see on the screen are areas that have an identity. They're residentially zoned areas that are built upon, and they're not going to change. We aren't planning as a city to change much in what you see here other than to add additional protection to existing neighborhoods. It's a significant swath of the city, which is the point of the slide. We'll point out these areas here at the top of the screen. That is the vacant land in the city, those 3 areas, other than some infill opportunities scattered throughout. Those are zoned R2 and they're vacant, so they will most likely be brought forward as a rezoning at some point in the future, but they are part of the residential land use. As we start to go through this, these will all add up, and then we can focus on what it is we're planning for. These are the city's existing employment centers. Again, these areas have an identity that is fairly stable. You've got the hospital and its environs. You've got an office park on Fall Hill. We have the industrial park and industrial zoning here along Beulah Salisbury Road and also down along Lansdowne Road at the southern end of the city. We also have the Hilton rezoning, a new medical center that is planned and entitled. And last year, that was the first implementation step of the Area 3 Small Area Plan. We have our core downtown. Our core downtown is largely built out. And while there's a lot to plan, we're working on the Area 7, which is the downtown small area plan now, and we will take a very in-depth look at it. We're not going to look at radical change in the downtown. It is largely built out already. And you put all these together and you see that there is not a whole lot of opportunity for change in the city, for areas for growth. But the city is growing. We're not like Southwest Virginia that's losing population. We're actually gaining population. And to take it one step further, these are the areas that are ready for redevelopment. And again, it's not a new land scenario. We do have some vacant land here and here. But what you see highlighted in blue and green on the screen are areas in the city that were built for a purpose, and that purpose they've either served that purpose, they're at the end of their useful life, or they are ready for the next evolution. These areas mostly happen to be zoned CH, or commercial shopping center, and those 2 zoning districts are ripe areas for redevelopment because they were largely built out. They were zoned in the 80s, and then the land use in those areas was largely built out based on automobile infrastructure and use, and those types of uses have lived their life. And particularly, we're talking about this area here in green. This is the T-5C Transect that's within Area 3. So this whole story to tell you that the ordinance that we're talking about today would apply on this green land here. And then subsequently, if this T5C tool is adopted in any of the other small area plans, it would apply there as well. One is proposed here in Area 6 in the Weiss Shopping Center. But for now, the ordinance that we're going to describe is only going to apply in this green area here. And not only that, but it'll only apply in the CH zoning district when residential uses are proposed. So we are not proposing any change to our standards for commercial development. If someone wants to come in and take a shopping center, upgrade it and redevelop it, that's great. They do so by right under our existing development standards and existing ordinances, and that is the normal process. We are not proposing any change to that. But what we found in our market study and in our early planning efforts is that these uses are changing, and there's going to be pressure for them to redevelop with more residential use. And so a lot of this effort is to get ahead of that and plan for the future as these residential uses are introduced, make sure that the regulations are in place, that they do so in a sustainable form that adds value to some of our aging automobile-oriented fabric. So what you see on the screen now, This is the T-5C Transect here in the light purple, and it covers the older shopping centers along Route 3. This is the only area that this would apply. And this T-5C Transect, the form-based code, is going to do three things. And again, it's only when residential uses are introduced. What we have in this area today are sets of land uses that are separate. They are made to be separate. They're buffered and screened from one another, and the interaction occurs at these intersections along the primary arterial roadway. That pattern is different from what is downtown, the more human scale, and what this ordinance would do would be to start transitioning from this style of land use to reintroduce streets and blocks and create a more vibrant, walkable urban place in those corridors. This is probably the most critical set of standards for this type of land use. Implementing streets, complete streets with sidewalks, places for people to be, and block patterns, and making it walkable is the most critical element. We are also looking at frontage standards. So now when you're in these places, you're in your car and you park and you walk across the asphalt into the building and back. And it's more of a place for cars. But as you introduce streets, you introduce things, elements like Caroline Street or William Street. It's a place where you are outside of your vehicle, and how do you implement that in an area that doesn't have that now? So we'll have a set of standards called frontage standards that govern the public realm, and we'll walk through the 4 different levels of that in a minute. And the final piece of what we are presenting tonight is lot and building type standards. So you can see this is a collection of old buildings in our downtown. Many buildings, differentiated facades, adds interest, vibrancy to the environment. And then you see the Kohl's, which has a vibrancy all of its own. It has been very successful in terms of its sales, but it was designed for you to go into the store and occupy the space into the store and then walk back out into the parking lot and get back in your car. And you have this long blank wall. So what you'll see is these requirements would require you to break up your buildings and create this civic space outside along the street. So now I'll just go back through those pieces and introduce the individual tools. The urban fabric standards, and again, if I'm going to say this like 6 times, this will only apply to the portion of the site that is used to calculate residential density. So you can redevelop these things piece by piece. You don't have to, this isn't going to require someone to do it all at once. And if you wanted to build a McDonald's here, you would just do that under today's ordinance. Nothing would change. But if you introduce residential development, you have to immediately introduce streets. And that is this first tool that you see called Access in the top left. The street network would line up with the existing streets and connections would be made. There are options to protect neighborhoods if through traffic is going to be a problem for an existing neighborhood. There is an option to make that a pedestrian connection that's lit and open and landscaped in that event so that we are not creating issues for adjacent neighborhoods. Along with streets, you build in blocks. And we talk about blocks a lot in our office. They're critical to have that environment where someone can walk around. So that's a block standard that would be introduced. Probably the most important tool is a transitional zone. These aren't mapped on any map. The ordinance just asks that when you redevelop, you look around the site, and if you have an adjacency to single family, so this, if it's here or if it's here, these single family homes that are highlighted in blue, a transitional zone is automatically implemented. That transitional zone will contain a step down in the form of the building, a maximum height comparable to the adjacent single family homes, which is 35 feet. That's a maximum height. A maximum width of 50 feet on the building. So the buildings will be smaller. You couldn't build a big building in this area here that's colored in yellow. It also contains a 40-foot minimum setback. Within that setback, 2 things would happen. Either an alley would be implemented and access would be offered to these folks here, or if physiographically you cannot make that connection, then a type D landscaping buffer would be deployed. Another very important tool that we've developed is called the formal open space tool. Open space currently in our development standards can be counted as stormwater ponds, peripheral landscaping, any of those things that are valuable, but don't provide an opportunity for gathering or for people to be. And you're permitted to count some of that as open space too, but half of your required open space in your development has to be either a park, plaza, square, or green. Those are defined terms. They come with minimum sizing requirements so that there's continuity, that there's usability of the space. It's got locational criteria so that it's located adjacent to a street and it's not kind of off in the back. And it has minimum landscaping standards as well, so there's some level of planting. So all of those tools together are the means by which, when residential uses are introduced into this environment here, we move more towards this environment here. I'll point to this one. It looks like it's got a little park right there, which would be a formal open space. The next set of standards are the frontage standards. And now these standards dictate what happens from the center line of the street to the wall of the building or the parking lot. And the standards have several elements. You've got a general street layout. Route 3 is one of the frontages that comes through here. This is an automobile-oriented frontage. There's no parking on the street. The street lights are at a automobile scale. There is a landscaping area required immediately adjacent to the right-of-way line on private property where your landscaping would be required to go. Then the building, parking lot, and the sidewalk connection are behind that line. Other primary frontages along within this area sometimes have pathways shown along them on the pathways trail. And where that occurs, you would have a primary frontage regardless, but where that pathway is indicated, you would build a 10-foot shared use path here. And then you'd have the same landscaping area, the street trees, the automobile scaled lights, and the building setback and the parking setback. The two more pedestrian scaled frontages, these would occur inside the site or maybe on some of the roads where they're transitioning towards single-family neighborhoods, maybe a secondary frontage. They would have a pedestrian scaled lighting, parallel on-street parking. They'd have relatively close setbacks. The sidewalk would be close to the street, and the parking would all be required to be behind the buildings. There's tools in there that dictate that a certain amount of the frontage has to be buildings. This area here, 33% can be parking lots closer to the road. They still have to be behind the building, but you can still have that component. And then as you move down here, the percentage gets less until it's 0 here at the retail frontage. And the retail frontage is a frontage that where all retail would be the frontage where retail use would be permitted. This is a picture from Libby Mill. I think I said Hill earlier. Libby Mill, which is a new development off of U.S. Staples Mill Road, U.S. Route 33 in Richmond. That is an example of what this type of regulation would require if residential uses were redeveloped. And this type of frontage here with the full width sidewalk with the pedestrian lighting and the street trees would be what was envisioned along your retail frontage. The final piece of this tool is lot and building type standards. So we've covered how to set your site. You build in streets, blocks, transitional zones, and you incorporate formal open space. We've talked about how the streets are developed, what they're designed to do, either pass traffic along Route 3 or be a place for people to gather on secondary retail frontages. And the final piece is what happens with the buildings. And these dimensional lines are more important than the actual picture that you see. The general building type is one that can go in the development in areas other than a transitional zone or a retail frontage. It has a certain height. It's got a certain maximum width. And then letter C is a transparency, and that means the rate of openings for windows and doors to make sure that it's an active and lively facade. The retail building is required along the retail frontage. It's the only building that retail uses are permitted in. It's got the same type of requirements as a general building. The differences are that there is a maximum or a minimum height to the first floor and a larger minimum transparency for the first floor. So I'm pointing to these storefront type windows so that no matter what the original use is, whether it's a restaurant or a lawyer's office or a bank, that retail can be loaded into that space along the retail frontage. and that ensures that that street serves its purpose. And finally, there's a transitional building type. And that building type is the only building type that would be permitted in this area here in the transitional building zone. The building, like we talked about earlier, is a maximum of 35 feet in height. It's a maximum of 50 foot in width. And it is, that's it. It does not permit retail. So that is how the form will be required to transition between the two uses. And that's the basics on the form-based code, which is a lot of information, but I'll hit a few other highlights here. The ordinance does require mixed use. The baseline density proposed in this development is the same. It's not proposed to change. There is a provision added to the ordinance that the residential density can go to 12 to 24 units per acre by special use permit. In that instance, 20 to 80% of the development will be required to be mixed. So there will be a mixed use requirement to meet that higher standard. This ordinance also proposes to change uses. Currently, there's two zoning districts along this corridor in the T-5C. Let me pull that back up. It's a mix of commercial highway and commercial shopping center. They're very similar, and we view them as redundant. And part of the work is to change everything over to one, which is commercial highway, which is the zoning district that we're loading this into. We'll rezone everything to commercial highway from commercial shopping center, and eventually we'll be able to take that out of the zoning ordinance and make our ordinance more efficient. So all that said, that there are some good things about commercial shopping center that commercial highway doesn't have, and they're ancillary residential uses. So we are including community centers and parks and things of that nature, more recreational uses, as well as some medical uses that weren't permitted, and a few other types of uses that are listed in your ordinance. So that's a component of this proposed ordinance. And I think the final thing that I'll end on is that we did a significant amount of work with a group of local engineers, some development folks, our planning department, and the city attorney's office in order to review this over time to make sure that folks could read this, that it was workable out of the gate. So I do want to thank everybody that worked on that. And we also hired a guy named Bill McAley, who was Virginia Beach's city attorney when they implemented their Oceanside form-based code. And he helped us get this across the finish line. He had some good suggestions on how their code operated, what to expect when you adopt this, that it will be changed, to use things like optional forms of development to provide for alternative creative ideas to get the type of development that you want. So that was the process that we used to develop this ordinance. I think that's an important point. I think that's all the information that I have on this. Again, the staff recommendation is to approve the ordinance, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Vice Mayor Withers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a couple of questions. Mike, as we talked earlier in the work session, the landscaping along Route 3 is, you've spelled it out with underlying tree heights and that kind of way. Would landscaping have to be approved as part of the site plan, the proposed landscaping, or would that be pretty much up to the developer to just go by the general rule?
It would, the landscaping requirements along the frontages would be required on a site plan.
Okay, good. So they would have to be approved as part of the site plan? Good,
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
The through streets, the second slide, I think, that you put up really is a picture of Route 3 and with Altoona, I think, behind it. I know that you have options of allowing, other than through streets that would run traffic into that subdivision. But if the developer just wanted to run it through that, could he do that by right, or would you have the option of giving him the other alternative route?
I'm going to find this so I can read it.
I know that's an option that administratively you can correct. I'm just want to make sure that the developer.
The option is provide for interconnectivity through limited road or trail connection linking existing and proposed development where a complete street would add through traffic onto neighborhood streets, so we would require it. we would require the option, which is the connection shall be a minimum of 50 foot wide and shall be safe,
Okay,
open, landscaped,
okay.
and lit as appropriate.
Okay, so in other words, if they wanted to run it through Altoona and there was
it was gonna have a
opposition to.
negative
Okay,
impact.
good, okay, good. Thank you, I'm sorry I didn't bring that up earlier. And I apologize, I usually try to give you a heads up on the questions I'm going to ask you, so to make sure that you're prepared, but on that slide 2, you know what the approximate acreage is in those little 3 shopping centers there? It looks like probably less than 20 acres.
This area here,
No, go back to slide 2. The light purple.
right here, the
Yeah.
approximate acreage here.
And I know you had that once
100 to 200 acres, plus or minus.
in just that little area,
Yes, sir.
100 acres?
Yes, sir.
Not that long.
Wow.
Yeah, and the one that I'm very certain on is this is 11 acres here.
Well, if that's 11,
Probably
then
100.
22 is probably, shouldn't be over 30 or 40 acres. Okay, that's all right, we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Craig? We did have a good and full discussion on this in our work session. This is a remarkable body of work and a true achievement, I think, for the city's planning department and in going forward with areas that we know will be redeveloped. The purposes for which they were originally developed are not quite the same. Traffics are not quite the same, and so hopefully we will be well prepared for the kind of redevelopment that comes to these areas. Any other questions for Mr. Craig? This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here who would like to speak to this matter? If so, please approach the microphone. I don't see anyone, so we will declare this public hearing closed. It's before us tonight for a first read.
Madam Mayor, I move first read amending the Unified Development Ordinance to provide for form-based zoning and to add form-based regulations to the Commercial Highway Zoning District and adopting a frontage map for the district.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you please read item 5C?
Amending the Unified Development Ordinance, Article 5, Development Standards to revise requirements for blocks and lots, access and parking.
Again, I'll call on Senior Planner, Mr. Craig.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As part of the small area plan process, what we are doing is trying to implement one of the council priorities, which is to look at the ordinance and address livability in the city of Fredericksburg. And how we've decided to do that, to be somewhat systematic, is to not only implement zoning ordinances like we just discussed, but look at the UDO to see what's working, what the kind of focus point of the area plan is, take the lessons that our group has learned, and the things that engineers tell us don't work either, and address livability kind of piece by piece, tied into the area plans. So with each area plan, we'll take another look at a different section, and that's what was before you all tonight. They're recommended ordinance modifications regarding blocks, lots, parking, and access, and that all relates to the work that we are looking at with the form-based code and all those things I mentioned previously. This was reviewed by the same group of folks that worked on the Commercial Highway Form-Based Code. It was also subject of a public hearing before the Planning Commission on November 14th and a second meeting on the 28th, after which the Planning Commission recommended approval of the ordinance 7-0. So I'll take you guys, if I could have a computer, please. I will take you through the three basic modifications that are proposed in this ordinance. Blocks and building placement, streets and access, and then parking. A significant component of this ordinance was to organize and clarify our access section, and we'll talk about that a lot in order to make it easier to read and hopefully easier to use. In terms of blocks and lots, what we've found doing a lot of rezonings and preliminary plats with the city council is that there's alternative ways of fronting lots on a street. And this is, Idlewild is really kind of a golden standard for neighborhood design. It's a really, really successful neighborhood in terms of how it was implemented. But this currently is not permitted. What I'm highlighting here on the screen in cyan is not currently permitted under today's zoning ordinance because lots are required to front on the streets. We've had several creative approaches to neighborhood design. Highlander, Hamptons at Noble are the two that come right. I know Marnie's back there. She could probably tell me a couple others that have come up recently that have done this kind of thing. And every time we have to ask for an administrative site plan exception, and you all weigh in on that for each of those approvals. You actually approve them, I think, for preliminary plats. The question came up, why don't we just make that as part of the ordinance? So we have here 25% of the lots are permitted to do this type of thing or to front on an open space, which is another thing that happens in Idlewild here. There's also a provision that they can front on an alley. That situation would be similar to the Riverview townhomes. That's more than 25%, but that where you've got the street frontage and then homes behind it, that's part of the ordinance as well. So that is one change. Another change is the block length. This red line right here is about 250 feet, and our current standard is 300. There are several instances in the downtown of blocks that are less than that. 250 feet also aligns with VDOT access management standards. We thought those two married up very well and wanted to modify that standard because, again, we've had to approve site plan exceptions for that in the past, and that we think that this works better. So those are two changes that are proposed. One change that's not shown here is the orientation of multifamily development into a block format. And we've discussed that a lot with the Planning Commission, and I maybe had a slide about that at the end. And what you've got here is the Hamptons, Coleman, and Noble rezonings, where a strong component of their eventual approval was that they provided for interconnectivity. They provided the urban fabric that we're kind of talking about by implementing a basic block pattern and using open spaces and that kind of thing. And it's different from what we have, what is permitted in our ordinance today, which this is along Cowan Boulevard. This was developed in the 70s and 80s. And you can see kind of the different options that we have available as the city grows with this type of development to have multifamily development incorporated into the larger urban fabric. So that is a change. It's just a change of the development standards. It doesn't change the availability of multifamily development, but that is something the Planning Commission wanted to discuss. And what they asked us to do before you all was to review the ordinance to see if there could be some type of flexibility added into that. You can see that these blocks are required to be built on streets, and this portion of the site meets that. These are parking lots, though they're still in a block form. So we did take their suggestion and add a provision that 25% of the units can be in a block or a set of blocks that are based on the parking lot drive aisle instead of the actual street. So that was a thing that was implemented from the Planning Commission. The second area of focus is streets and access. The issue with this section was that it was hard to read. We had disagreements with folks over what a commercial driveway was, whether or not townhomes could front on them, for example, what an easement, they could front on an easement. That always came up. And then we'd have a disagreement saying, no, they need to be on streets. And it was an area where we and the folks working in our ordinance weren't reading the same thing or reading it the same way. So a big a portion of this work is to make it clear that there's a street here, and this is one of our better streets, William Street, more pedestrian-oriented streets, but a street is just a complete street with sidewalks. And then a commercial driveway is this type of facility that you have in Central Park, which serves a great function in our commercial areas. It doesn't have sidewalks. It serves to move traffic off of arterial highways and get them into the individual sites. In this case, the O'Charlie's, you don't dump right into the O'Charlie's parking lot. You come down the commercial driveway and then access the site that way. There's a third level of access. So we've organized this into three levels of access: streets, commercial driveways, and alleys. The alley was already a pretty clear piece of infrastructure, but the width was 24 feet, required to be 24 feet. This is Idlewild. This is 19 feet, 20 feet wide. And we approved several, again, administrative modifications for residential projects to meet the Idlewild standard. And so we are asking to go ahead and encode that as the required width of an alley. The final piece, the final kind of modification to the standards, our current parking standard is very subjective. It works well in a downtown, but the standard is to be safe for pedestrians and automobiles. That's very needed flexibility here in this area, but it's hard to enforce in suburban areas, and we were relying on other standards to provide a reasonable width that we could require people to have. So what we've done is create this table. We've done a lot of research into what the appropriate lengths and then the appropriate types of parking that came off of that would be. And we've come up with this table to standardize parking lot drive aisles. We've added a provision to preserve the ability for someone to provide a computer model showing that they need a narrower width in an instance like in the downtown or anywhere else where they needed it, as long as they can model that it's safe for the pedestrians and the cars and that everyone can actually access it. You can reduce it that way. So this was a set of standards that was added as well. That was the focus of our efforts on the UDO, the general UDO. The staff recommendation, again, is to approve the ordinance, as is the Planning Commission recommendation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Craig? The only question that I've had posed to me was access, specifically access to existing commercial sites and, or, some that might be redeveloped, the access from the arterial or the major artery.
Yes, ma'am, and that section of the ordinance has been reorganized and put in a new place, but there's no change proposed to how access is handled. And if, just for the sake of more detail, currently we use the VDOT access management standards, which would require a regular level of access with some level of improvement to the throat of basically a commercial driveway. We have in our ordinance engineering discretion for the Public Works Director that he can make informed decisions based on the character of the site and the engineering challenges. And our goal is to improve access to the best that we can, hopefully within full compliance with the standard. But we have retained all of that ability, and so there's no change proposed there.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Craig? This is a public hearing. Is there anyone here who would like to speak? Then I will declare the public hearing closed. The matters before us again for a first read.
Madam Mayor, move first read amending the Unified Development Ordinance Article 5 Development Standards to revise requirements for blocks and lots access and parking.
Madam Mayor.
Vice Mayor Withers.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As I said in work session, I'm still a little concerned about the by right use of residential, but I believe that overall this ordinance is workable. I want to thank the staff. We've been working on this for a long time, and we've come up with some ideas as we've worked forward, and planning has implemented those into this ordinance, the landscaping, different things, and I for one appreciate that. So I'm going to support this, even though I've got some reservations about the residential use of by right in some of our commercial areas. I believe that that when it is redeveloped, unless it's a small site, it'll be under special use. I don't think people will be doing 12 acres in these larger sites. I think they'll be shooting for a higher goal, and then we will have some say about how that's done. So again, thank you, staff, for listening to a lot of us and working to make this something we can support. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Any further comments or discussion? The motion's been made and seconded. Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We've now reached the point in our meeting where we have comments from the public. For folks who have signed up to speak before the meeting, please observe the 5-minute time limit and yield the floor when the clerk indicates your time has expired. We have 2 people signed up to speak tonight. The first is Dave McLaughlin.
Good evening, I'm Dave McLaughlin, I live at 1420 Kenmore Avenue. My comments are relevant to one of the agenda item, the consent agenda item about the movement of the polling place in Walker Graham. If you remember back in November, our election, it went really well in Fredericksburg. There was areas north of us, other parts of the country, it didn't go very well at all. Long lines, ran out ballots, they had to extend polling times, all kinds of things. As a sworn officer of election, I got to observe firsthand how well prepared we were, how well managed it was, the training that was provided, and you know, I attribute that to Mark Hoffman, his staff, and the volunteers have been doing this for many, many years, so it went really well. I think this movement of the polling place will just make it even better. So I totally highly endorse that move. And finally, I'd like to say that last year, I mean, this council, this city manager, his staff really had a great year. It was a good year. And it's a new year, and I'm looking forward to more of the same this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David James?
City Council members, my name is David James. I'm the president for Historic Fredericksburg Foundation Incorporated, HFFI. I'm guided by a mantra, do what's right, not what's easy. And I suspect y'all are, you wouldn't be on city council, and I do appreciate your service. I'm sure by now that you've all read or heard about HFI's formal written request for an appeal of the certificate of appropriateness that was issued by the ARB for 129 Carolina Street. The grounds for this appeal are based on the same Secretary of Interior standards. The actual standards is a complete book. The city's Unified Development Code only requires the ARB enforce 10 small paragraphs, about 1 page of print. It's a very quick read, and it's in the first page of your handout. I was reminded the day after the December ARB meeting that we, Historic Fredericksburg Foundation Incorporated, held a preservation easement on this property. Even without formal schooling in preservation, I was surprised at portions of the ARB request, as I suspect you will be when you look at the abbreviated SOI standards that the ARB is required to use versus what was approved by the ARB. You see, we at HFFI use the same Secretary of Interior standards with preservation easements. If the ARB had followed the guidance, I would not be standing in front of you today. To make it worse, our HFFI Board of Directors does not meet until the 23rd of January. If I wait, our only course of action will be to spend money earmarked for preservation easements. That's basically to hire an attorney to file an injunction to stop a building permit, and that's not how I want to spend HFI's monies. So I decided to pass on my quandary to you as a council. That will give me enough time to meet with HFI's Board of Directors and decide if we want to drop the appeal or allow you as City Council to pass judgment on your own ARB. I've left you in a pickle, and ironically, it's a similar position that I was inadvertently placed in by the ARB. And here's the sad part. We are all really on the same team. We should all go by the same playbook. The SOI standards are pretty cut and dry. So how did this happen? How does it happen that the ARB can extinguish property rights without providing notice to a landowner? Your packet has a copy of our preservation easement in it. I'm no attorney, but how is it even legal that the ARB can authorize alterations to a property when we hold a preservation easement that says it can't be altered? Well, if the easement was owned by the Department of Historic Resources or on the National Register, would their property rights be trampled? Would they be notified? To my mind, the ARB guidelines should be modified. HFFI would be willing to provide the addresses of the 47 other properties within the city that we actually hold. Some people in town would even say that HFFI's easement program is no longer needed as the ARB follows the SOI standards. I say that our whole system of self-government is based on a series of checks and balances. This action is an example of checking city actions to make sure that we stay balanced from preservation efforts. HFI has led the fight for preserving our fair town since 1955. We are a watchdog organization to protect and preserve the historic nature of our city. I will request that HFI's board consider dropping this appeal if I can be given assurances that City Council would provide guidance that the ARB in the future would adhere and not waffle on Secretary of Interior standards per the UDO, that HFFI would be allowed to review and recommend changes to the ARB guidelines and be an active partner in the current efforts to revise those guidelines. And we'd also ask that the ARB provide us with notice when a request for alteration is made on a property covered by one of our easements. Lastly, we would like the city to agree to revise the 2012 MOU with the Historic Fredericksburg Foundation. I know it's a big request, but it's honest, heartfelt, and with the best of intent. The flip side is this: I may not be able to get HFI's board of directors to agree to drop the appeal request. We have quite a few hardline preservationists. Any of you are welcome to call me with suggestions on how this might be resolved. My home phone number is 373-0089. Thank you for your attention.
Mr. James, could you please provide that, a written copy of that or a typed copy of that to our clerk?
I did, ma'am. Thank
Oh, you
very
do?
much.
So we will have that.
I did.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Does any counselor wish to remove anything from the consent agenda? Council agenda. Oh, I'm sorry. Counselor Devine.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Item 7A, branding kickoff meeting.
All right, item 7A. Counselor Duffy had his
No.
hand. No. Counselor Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Item 7B, bump stock collection. Bump stock collection.
Gotcha. Anyone else? Counselor Fry?
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. Fredericksburg Gun Give Back.
Go and give back. All right. I'll call on Counselor Devine for.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to bring to council's and the public's attention the branding kickoff meetings that we are preparing for on Wednesday, January 16th and Thursday, January 17th. There are a series of meetings on both days, and the schedule is available on our website. But I did want to point out that first of all, the city of Fredericksburg is preparing to develop a brand image that is more than our city seal and logo, and will hopefully represent the best our city has to offer. The branding committee, which Mayor, you were a part of, I was a part of, as well as many staff members, Lynn Enders, Brenda Martin, Sonia Wise, and members of our EDA and Planning Commission, Beth Black and Tom Crimmins. And Mr. Nixay served as an advisor at some points along the way. Anyway, we met over the summer and narrowed a very big pool of submissions down to one, and we are working with Hub Incorporated. Anyway, these two meetings, or these 2 days, are going to be full of meetings. There are 3 meetings scheduled on Wednesday, January 16th, from 8:30 to 10, sort of the business community and the chamber, 4 to 5:30, churches and nonprofits. But at 7 to 8:30 p.m. on Wednesday, January 16th, it's a community meeting where all the public is invited. Those meetings are at the Executive Plaza building. On Thursday, January 17th, there are meetings. The public meeting that day is 10:15 to 11:45 at Dorothy Hart Community Center. And then City Council will be meeting that evening at 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at Executive Plaza again. So many of the community have been alerted to this through emails and on our website and through our Facebook account, but I did want to make sure that all of you knew you were invited on Thursday, January 17th from 6 to 7:30, and hopefully others in the public will attend as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Devine. Counselor Graham.
Thank you,
Item
Madam.
7B.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Many people may have heard about bump stocks, the devices that essentially turn semi-automatic weapons into fully automatic ones. They are banned in the United States beginning March 21st. As part of that executive order, local law enforcement offices were granted the right to determine whether they would accept bump stocks that were turned in by owners. And I spoke with Chief Nye here in the Fredericksburg Police Department, and I just wanted to announce publicly that he has said that the Fredericksburg Police Department will accept bump stocks turned in prior to March 21st. So I want to thank the Fredericksburg Police Department for being a part of the solution for getting these devices off the street. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Graham. Counselor Fry.
Thank you, Mayor Greenlaw. That was a good introduction for what I'm about to talk about. We didn't even plan that. I just wanted to say that publicly. I missed the December meeting. I was stuck on the UPS truck for the first time in I think 4.5 years. But that's what happened. But I'm not sure if it was touch base on about the gun give back. But I just wanted to say publicly there were 19 firearms collected at the last gun give back in December, and I may be one number off, but I think it's 176 that we have collected in the last 5 years since December 2014, and but I'll say 175 to be more sure. But I want to thank the public and everyone that can hear this. I'm passionate about this, and when it comes to gun violence, I do my rants and my raves, and I do this counting. It's some people might think it's outlandish, but I do this counting of homicides and murders for a reason. So hopefully one day I can sit here and be quiet. That's the point. So if I can nag about it enough, then one day I'll be able to sit here and won't have anything to report about homicides in the city of Fredericksburg. So I want to say thank you again to everybody that participated, and special thanks to Fredericksburg Police Department and the Sheriff's Department, like these guys out there on a Saturday, and it's just to see everybody out there and totally engaged in the process, and for the residents, like every year I panic, is the word getting out enough? You know, you always want more, but obviously it's working because folks are looking forward to it, and you know they could turn this weapon in anytime, and you know they're holding it or whatever the case to this day because they know that we're doing it, and I hope that we can get to the point to where senseless, all murders are senseless, but just where we don't have them. And it may sound like a huge goal, but I feel good and confident reporting this January 2019 into a fresh year. And the murder-free Fredericksburg thing that I speak on, it's non-existent. I'm trying to make it existent. I'm trying to speak it into existence. So what I want is for 2019 that we go homicide-free, murder-free. And I've been trying to do a calendar year, and then something happens every 11 months or 10 months. It's you know, I look at a certain point and I say, well, you know, so I hope as a city we can start fresh right now, 2019, and go murder-free. It'll be real. It'll be a real big deal. And in the future, as long as we don't have these crazy, you know, things that happen when people are losing their lives, I would like to look into the second phase of the funding that we use for fighting these crimes, where we can do more positive things in the city. Everybody, it's supposed to be budget time for us, but you know the numbers that we spend on these senseless crimes, and especially what the families had to deal with, I would love to see that money reversed. You know, if we could look at it for a certain period of time where we're not having these situations and spend that money. You know, I don't care if we bought passes for that slide that we had over the summer, you know, for the whole city to get on the slide. I don't care what it is. We need to celebrate something that's positive as a city. But once again, thank you, and thanks for all the council members and city staff that reach out to me doing this, you know, and you know, give me the thumbs up and all of that good stuff. But mainly that's it. So, Mayor, my goal is maybe not to have a murder-free Fredericksburg update this year. I do it periodically to say 0, and but that's my goal for now. So, murder-free Fredericksburg, I'm gonna try my best not to speak on that. Well, let me say this publicly: I will not speak on it. And in 2020, January, whatever date that is for that meeting, I'll be happy to report a update that we had 0. So thank you, Mayor Greenlaw.
Thank you, Councilor Fry. We'll look forward to no reports. Does any councilor wish to remove anything from the council agenda? Councilor Duffy.
Item 8A.
Item 8A. Anyone else? Councilor Kelly?
Madam Mayor, I'd like to pull item 8D.
8D. Anything else?
Okay, Madam Mayor, I'll move the consent agenda, pulling items A and D.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
All right, Councilor Duffy, I will call on you for 8A.
Thank you. I do just want to draw attention to item 8A, which is the move of Ward 3 elections from Lafayette Upper Elementary School back to Walker Grant Middle School. I just want to make sure the public is aware of this. They will receive a public notice through the mail. We will advertise it on the webpage and social media. And it is just down the street, and it is where we used to vote in my ward, Ward 3. But I think it is important to do our best to make sure that everybody who wants to vote does vote. So I just wanted to make sure everyone knew about it. And with that, I will propose the ordinance on second read, changing the Ward 3 polling place from Lafayette Upper Elementary to Walker Grant Middle.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Councilor Kelly, item 8D.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Not any questions on it. I just think this is something that the public should be aware of that we kind of do. And I think it's a great initiative and something really getting started. And I think we should inform the public on something like this when we have those opportunities to show what's kind of going on in the city. And if to ask the city manager if we can kind of get a heads up on how this came about and where we're going with it.
Yeah. And what he's referring to is a smart communities grant that we're participating in. Mr. Baruti?
Yes, Madam Mayor, happy to talk to this briefly. I'll also ask our IT Director, Suzanne Tills, to elaborate just a bit. I do want to say that this has been a collaborative effort. IT has been working with procurement and the planning department. This is all in response to an opportunity we discovered several months ago from the governor's IT team at CIT. We obviously jumped at the opportunity to try to make it work. With that, again, I'd ask maybe Suzanne Tills just to spend maybe 90 seconds or so, highlight how we're going to head down this path.
Thank you, Mr. Bertie. I appreciate it. Well, as Tim mentioned, or Mr. Bertie mentioned, we are taking advantage of an opportunity for a grant from CIT to explore Smart Communities opportunity, where we will collect some data points. Some of the data we already have, we're going to match it up with our GIS data and do some deep dive on some data analytics so that we can see if we can find some trends over time related to property issues that we might have in the city, so that we can target our responses more closely to the areas that need the greatest, that have the greatest need. So basically trying to take a different look at our data spatially and also through time to try and find out where the trends are. If there are certain times a year we might have more issues, or certain areas of the city we might be able to direct more resources to try and improve our property in the city, property issues.
Thank you very much. In short, we're basically coming into the 21st century and actually starting to really take advantage of what technology is allowing us to do. And I really appreciate all the efforts and also to the governor and CIT for bringing this forward to us and letting us have an opportunity to take advantage of it. With that, I'll move the resolution approving fiscal year 2019 budget amendment appropriating funds in the city grant funds for Center for Innovation Technologies Smart Communities Grant.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
We have 3 sets of minutes before us: the work session on November 13th, the public hearing of December 11th, and the regular session of December 11th. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move approval of the minutes as submitted.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 10A, I will call on the budget manager, Mrs. Jett.
City Council is asked to approve a resolution authorizing $200,000 of general fund balance for a contribution to the city's OPEB trust fund. Staff recommends approval of the attached resolution on first read. On September 25th, Council passed a resolution assigning $200,000 for this purpose to offset the liability in the city's OPEB trust. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits and relates to health care, predominantly for 1,996 employees. As of June 30th, 2018, the city's net OPEB liability was $14.6 million. The city's total liability was $16 million, but since the city made prior contributions and had interest earnings, that liability has been reduced to about $1.355 million. So the OPEB trust, again, includes past contributions as well as investment income totaling about $118,000. If you want more information, this information is also included in the city's comprehensive annual financial report. So staff recommends approval of this resolution, which will contribute $200,000 of the city's fund balance, assigned fund balance, to the OPEB trust for future payments of health care.
Any questions from Ms. Jett?
Madam Mayor, I move a resolution on first read approving a fiscal year 2019 budget amendment appropriating funds in the general fund for a contribution to the other post-employment benefits trust fund.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 10B, I'll also call upon Ms. Jett.
Hello, this is for a supplemental appropriation for the schools for their 2018 grants, amending the FY19 budget for the 2018 grants. This was approved by the school board on December 3rd, 2018, and the list of what grants this will be used for are included in the resolution in your background memo. There are no additional city funds required for this appropriation, and staff recommends approval.
Any questions?
Madam Mayor, I move to approve the resolution on first read approving a fiscal year 2019 budget amendment appropriating funds in school grants funds.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Item 10C, I'll call on Development Administrator, Mrs. Sherman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The item before you is a follow-up to the work session we held on December 11th regarding changes to the city's sign ordinance, specifically related to temporary banners, drive-through signs, and the use of electronic variable message signs for gas stations. These requested changes were prompted by business and nonprofit stakeholders in 2018. The draft ordinance included in your package follows what was presented to council in December with regard to the drive-through signs and addresses council's feedback regarding temporary banners, specifically that banners could be displayed for up to 60 consecutive days instead of the 30-day limitation currently in the code. But the overall limitation of only 4 times a year and 120 days maximum per year remains. Additionally, the standard that each display shall be separated by a period of 30 days also would remain. Council also directed staff to revise the proposal for the use of the electronic variable message signs at gas stations. The proposed draft would expand the use of these types of signs for gas stations that front on routes 1, 2, and 3 only. Messages would be limited to 3 areas on each sign of up to 12 inches in height and 36 inches in width on each sign. Messages could change up to 3 times per day. All other current design standards prohibiting animation effects, managing brightness, and controlling programming would still apply. If council initiates the text amendments tonight, staff will continue to engage local sign companies to ensure, to get added feedback and ensure that the proposed standards do meet industry standards while achieving the city's goal for quality signage. Staff recommends that City Council approve the resolution in your package to initiate the proposed sign ordinance amendments. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Are there any questions for Ms. Sherman? Yes, Councilor Duffy.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sherman. I'm supportive of all this, but can someone remind me of how we're able to regulate these signs of gas stations differently from other signs? I thought because of the First Amendment issues that was a challenge.
Ms. Sherman?
We can regulate signs based on their location and how they are tied to specific uses. We cannot regulate what how the gas stations may use these 3 areas, but we can limit the size of the area, how the effects work within each sign. But just like we can allow for additional signage for drive-throughs, the code already allows for 1 additional sign for gas station uses. And so specific to those signs, these regulations could apply.
I didn't quite understand that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Sherman.
Madam Mayor, I'll move the resolution initiating amendments to the Unified Development Ordinance 72-59 signage to allow temporary banners for up to 60 consecutive days and to allow electronic variable message signs associated with accessory drive-through uses and gasoline sales uses.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Please cast your votes.
Motion passes 7-0.
All right. I'll call upon Mr. Baroody for the city manager's update.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to highlight the fact that the Winter Restaurant Week is about to begin. It does start January 18th. We do still have 4-hour parking available downtown, so take advantage of Restaurant Week again, January 18th through the 27th. We've got lots of information at www.fredericksburgrestaurantweek.com. Again, www.fredericksburgrestaurantweek.com. Come join us in the city of Fredericksburg. I also want to thank the Parks Department and a lot of internal agencies for coordinating this year's great celebration of New Year's Eve at Fredericksburg Fairgrounds. We welcomed some 600 attendees. That was a great attendance. We look to do that in future years as well. It was, I think, especially successful because there was an indoor and an outdoor venue, all co-located. So we look to do that, a repeat of that in future years. So stay tuned for future parties in future years. We also want to thank the International Coalition of Sites of Conscience for their work throughout 2018. They have wrapped up 3 phases of work with city and our stakeholders, residents throughout the community did participate in more than a dozen public meetings. More than 250 folks participated in that process. We will expect final phase 3 a report and recommendations in February, so we haven't yet scheduled that, but it will be with us soon. I do expect the coalition to be with us one last time, at the very least one last time, to highlight phase 3 findings and recommendations. Also remind folks that the phase 1 and phase 2 reports are on our website, main city website, so find that information at that location. Also remind the public that Christmas tree pickup is in full force. Please make sure that your tree is out at the curb. We do have pickups all of this week. And leaf collection season actually does continue. Because of the weather, it's been delayed. The rain, it's been delayed a bit, but look on our website for more information on that as well. Lastly, I'll highlight the fact that the Spring 2019 Activities Catalog has been published for our parks, recreation, and events, so lots of activities throughout the spring. You can find that at the Parks Department as well. Lastly, I'll suggest that your calendar is before you, and Madam Mayor, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Baroody? Thank you. We do have a closed session. Do I have a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move to close session, or close meeting under Code of Virginia 2.2-3711A39 for discussion of confidential memoranda, working papers, and other information related to economic development related to the Liberty Place project and to a confidential technology business prospect where disclosure of the information would adversely affect the financial interest of the city of Fredericksburg.
Second.
Please cast your votes.
You gonna vote?
We will
Motion
adjourn.
passes 7-0.
Yeah, we will adjourn up to upstairs, not adjourn, but we will move upstairs for the closed session.
You're welcome.